Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mitali Nkonde. I am the leader of AI for the People, a responsible AI team that works with companies across Silicon Valley and helps them to develop responsible AI strategies and policies. Today, it is my pleasure to be in conversation with Professor Lessig from Harvard Law School and a discussion around AI and democracy and where we are now and where we look to be going in the future. So without further ado, Professor Lessig, I would love for you to come in and introduce yourself and your work and just some opening statements around broad strokes, AI and democracy, huge topics. What should we be thinking, feeling, and as we end 2024, really doing to make sure that we can protect ourselves in these uncertain times?
Yeah, Mitali, so thank you so much for participating in this conversation with me, because it's an incredibly important topic, especially to keep clear what is the present threat and what is the future threat. Many people, when they think about AI right now, are thinking about the LLMs or the chatbots that actually didn't seem to matter much in this last election cycle. But we should not forget that the social media algorithms are a kind of AI, and those algorithms were incredibly important in determining what people understood about this past election, what they didn't know, what they knew that was not true. And that those technologies are only going to get even more consequential in the spread of information in our fractured media environment. So those are, I think, the immediate concerns. And then we need to start thinking about how, when these technologies become really good at persuading people or engaging with people for the purpose of persuading, how they might then subsequently affect how democracy is functioning more generally.
That's actually very good grounding for the discussion, because as I think back, certainly over to the last year and how much happened to us within this election cycle, I'm always curious when I'm speaking to experts like you to try and help me and the viewing public understand situations like it seems like a million years ago now, but President Biden at one point was our nominee. And there was that very famous synthetic phone call that was detected. And everything in the news was saying, this is AI, this is synthetic, this isn't really his voice. For clarity, when we're thinking about present threats, could you kind of give us an idea of what that was? Where was the AI in that? And at the time, we were just told, don't believe it. But how could we kind of pick that up?
Yeah, this is actually one of the most dangerous AI technologies that's being deployed right now. Actually, much more significant in ordinary people's lives, because the technology, with very little sampling of somebody's voice, has the capability of mimicking that person and being incredibly convincing even to family members. So, it's one thing, and obviously terrible, if you pretend to be the president and start directing people how or when they need to vote. But it's a much more pedestrian but really significant problem if your grandmother gets a call from somebody purporting to be you, telling her that you need money right away. Could she please get you $5,000 so that you're not arrested or whatever? And the point is, we don't actually have any good infrastructure, police infrastructure or surveillance infrastructure right now to be able to intercept or to identify that type of AI, and it's increasingly significant from the financial fraud standpoint about how it's going to be deployed. But with President Biden, it was basically so convincing that it was him talking that people would have been misled about whether, in fact, this was the president saying what the president was doing. And it's in a general class of fake AI, fake content that is deployed for the purpose of persuading people either to engage in a particular way, or much more effectively, just to convince them not to engage at all, to convince them there's no reason to engage, because they either are so disappointed with their own party, or they don't think they need to for the purpose of bringing the election result that they want to fruition. And so this misinformation and basic fraud can be quite consequential. And right now, there's relatively little the government is authorized to do about it. In California, they passed a law targeting these deep fakes in AI, and it was immediately suspended by a district court who said the First Amendment protected this political speech, even though it was potentially fraudulent, and that the remedy to that fraudulent speech was to have people give counter speech or speech that tried to represent the other side to the story, which, for anybody, like you or people listening to this conversation, we realize how crazy that is because, we understand that when people see something online, they're not going to be spending all their time trying to see what are the alternative versions of this or what are people saying about whether it's true. Most of the people will have an immediate impact from that, and that immediate impact can be quite consequential, especially right next to an election.
Oh my goodness, so much there. And thank you. And I think where I'm really interested in what you're saying is democracy, big D, going to the ballot box, big elections. But what I would love for us to think about, what does this mean in small d democracy? What does it mean? I love the example you gave of my daughter, for example, is college age, and then somebody calls her and says, I've had an accident or I need money, and that elicits a response. I would love for you to think about when we think about democracy in a small d, you work on a university campus. What would the implications of a deep fake telling young people, for example, students, that the administration had told them to behave in a certain way or do a certain thing, knowing that, as you pointed out, that the government can do very little to do with this? Do you believe that there is a role for the tech companies themselves to come in and moderate this? And if so, what would that possibly look like in your view?
Well, I think that the instinct that we have is that the tech companies should step up and take a responsibility here. The background for tech responsibility in the context of the internet has been quite weak because Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, passed way back in 1996, basically granted them immunity for speech put on their platforms, regardless of whether the speech was defamatory or harmful in some way. The only exceptions were originally copyright violations, and then eventually child sex speech, which was also exempted from that immunity. And when that originally was passed, the reason they granted that immunity was that the tech platforms plausibly said, look, there's no way for us to actually control the speech that's on our platform. We can't even know what it is. Like, you're in a AOL chat group and you're posting something that turns out to be defamatory. We're not reading those messages. We can't hire people to read all those messages. So you've got to give us immunity. Otherwise, we're just going to have to shut these platforms down. That may well have been true in 1996. But the whole business model of these platforms today depends upon their AI having the capacity to understand precisely what's being said in all of these contexts, or what the speech or what the images or what the speech actually is, because it's based on that content that they're deciding what ads they're going to target you with, or who they're going to feed this content to, or what's more likely to get engagement. So the AI, whether Mark Zuckerberg knows it or not, the AI that Mark Zuckerberg spends money deploying is perfectly aware of the kinds of content that's out there, and that given that they are aware, the law ought to catch up and make them responsible, at least for the harmful or malicious or false speech that they might actually be perpetrating, especially in contexts of vulnerable citizens. We've got lots of attention worrying about political gamesmanship, lots of attention worrying about cybersecurity and whether the Chinese are stealing our stuff. I think we need more attention worrying about whether grandma or my daughter is actually being exploited because of the capacity of this technology to do enormous harm. Now, at the same time that we recognize the capacity for harm, we have to recognize this is a Janus phase technology. It's the best, it's the worst technology we've ever invented and the best technology we've ever invented. It both has the potential to do enormous damage. It also has potential to do enormous good. And what we should do in the face of a technology that's both capable of doing great good and great harm is to develop the infrastructure for regulating the harm while encouraging the good. And I think that that's very difficult challenge. And what I'm anxious about is that we seem to be entering a stage in our government which is going to not be capable of stepping in and regulating in a smart way to make sure that the harms are avoided while the good is realized.
I love that. I think specifically AI for the People, the organization that I run, that's certainly at the basis of our mission and our ethos and our belief. We don't want to ban things. We don't want to run people out of town. We just want to figure out what are the best use cases. The Nobel Prize that went out this year, for example, right, for the folding of new proteins from the founders of DeepMind. That's what we want. We want those types of we want that type of innovation, but we not looking for the type of things that you said. One of the things that I'd love to pick up on and what you said around regulation and what we're going into. We're transitioning from an environment in which extremely smart people, many whom I've had the pleasure to work with, had been working with the Biden-Harris administration, specifically on guardrails for AI, and led to an executive order that basically at the basis of that order is we need to take a rights respecting approach, something that you and I are both aware of, this idea of responsible AI, as opposed to the go fast and break things. Kind of, I hate that we keep speaking about Mark Zuckerberg specifically, but the go fast and break things ethos. My next question to you is, full disclosure, AI for the People holds positions in some of the companies in which we seek to influence. So if you're an Amazon stockholder and you have a 33% annualized return over the last 30 years, or if you are Warren Buffett and you're holding Apple stock, which has had a 23% annualized return over the last 30 years, these technologies are they're generating an incredible amount of wealth for people. So in your view, as we're looking for what you describe as smart regulation, and I'm certainly going to push you on that as we get into our portion of and what next. We have Elon Musk who seems to have a very prominent role. What next? Looking at these huge returns in the market, this huge wealth that's being created, what incentives, if any, from your perspective, could we present to these companies to do some of this regulation work, or even present to the government to do some of this regulation work, given the fact that we are a capitalist country and we're Americans, we love getting rich? I would love your views on that.
Yeah, so I think the first really important thing is something you're doing already, and that is to talk about it in a way that expands people's imagination about where AI might matter, right? Like it's easy for us to look at these private companies that are developing these extraordinary technologies and just think this is just the sort of thing that private companies will do, and it'll be completely private. And they'll just be going out there building their technology for whatever purpose it is, whether it's to sell more ads or whatever. But the point is, like, AI is not just for the private sector. Like, if we could talk about public AI, like the AI that would make the public sector work better, there would be an enormous gain that all of us could appreciate. I make lawyers for a living, but I think AI should eliminate 70% of lawyers. I think that we could radically lower the cost of rule of law in America, making it cheaper for more people to take advantage of these principles that are built into our tradition, but which are imperfectly realized now just because the cost of law is so extremely high. If you have a Social Security benefits appeal, it takes a year for that to be decided on average in the United States right now, because we don't invest in the resources to make it so that we have enough judges to decide this more quickly. But, there's no reason why the vast majority of these decisions couldn't be made very quickly and with humans reviewing it if there's some appeal necessary, so that you could move from a year to a day. And if we could move the decisions of the government from a year to a day, so many people who depend upon the government's resources, like elderly people on Social Security, could actually benefit in a way that would make a meaningful difference in their lives. Science is the most obvious context where AI deployed for the purpose of discovering like new techniques for folding techniques to identify new proteins, or techniques for identifying solutions to great diseases that we face. These have an enormous gain to all of us together. And the point to think about is how we can encourage this, as well as permit or encourage the private sector AI as well. And what we need to see is that we will have to invest in this public AI. We can't just ask OpenAI or Google to do it for us, because if they do it for us, then they're going to do it in a way that's benefiting them. We need to invest in public AI the way we've invested in public courts, or we've invested in bureaucracies that are supposed to be helping all of us. And if we did that, I think there's an enormous potential to make government and the public sector function much more efficiently and better for all of us.
I wish I had a marching band and a chorus of angels, because you are definitely speaking my language, and I'm going to push you even further on this. This idea of a public sector AI whose development, deployment, and governance to serve the public good is, in my opinion, should be the next stage as we think about our democracy, small d, putting elections aside, but how we as citizens of the United States go about our days. I have some process questions for you. So you're talking about that we should invest in this. I agree. Who is the we? How can people like me? I'm part of what I think I like to call an engaged citizenry. How can I get involved in that? And how can we? And I'm saying this almost ashamed, because I know that we have incredibly close margins, certainly at the federal level, but maybe even at the state level. What kind of questions should we be asking our representatives and our policymakers to let them know that this is the direction in which we want to take the AI sector? And in fact, this is what we deserve, I think, is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to think about how we move forward. So one way is to think about how we can make democratic governance work better. And I love the way you put the point about aside from elections, because I think we need to recognize that there's so much more we could do with democratic governance separate from who we're going to elect to one particular office. There, for example, extremely valuable experiments that have happened across the world, especially in Taiwan, using technologies like Polis, which uses not super fancy AI, but uses an AI to be able to figure out for a large population where there's agreement about complicated topics, where there's disagreement about complicated topics, and give everybody the chance to participate in asking questions or pushing the conversation along to bring about a clear statement and consensus for a public. I think we should be multiplying the number of places in the United States at the local level, maybe even the state level, where governments try to bring in thousands of more people into the process of thinking about problems that we all have a visceral sense of because we have to live by it day to day. And I think if we could get this bottom-up democratic governance going using technologies like Polis, there's a really fantastic technology called Common Good AI, which is a similar aggregating technique for figuring out where there are views of the public that we have agreement on, where there's disagreement, and then complementing that with virtual deliberation platforms where people can deliberate virtually with like 6 or 8 people, but then they aggregate to be 600,000 people, depending on how many people want to participate, to talk about the issues we have disagreements about. We could begin to use the technology to improve the health of our democratic deliberations. That's one place. The second place is, look, you've got all these tech billionaires out there talking about the need for government efficiency. I like that word, efficiency. Efficiency doesn't mean cutting spending. Efficiency means doing more with less. And so to get efficiency, I mean, just ask Jeff Bezos. When Jeff Bezos his company produced one of the most efficient platforms for commerce in the history of humanity. Did he do that by cutting spending? No, he spent an enormous amount of money investing in infrastructure that could do the job of building a platform for selling things better than anything that ever happened before. We need to think that same way about government. Yes, we need a more efficient government. That might well mean spending a ton more money to invest in the infrastructure so government can do its work better, so it can deal with humans better. So when you want to call the IRS, I've been literally for the past 10 days needing to call the IRS. I spend 10 minutes to get to a point in their telephone tree where they say, I'm sorry, there are too many people on hold. You'll have to call back later. I mean, it's ridiculous that the system is that inefficient, but the way to make it efficient is not to cut 70% of IRS employees. The way to make it efficient is to invest in the resources necessary to make our government work better. And AI could multiply the value of that investment dramatically. So we need to push people to actually produce a better government, a more efficient government, and employ AI to do that. No doubt, watching all of the things we need to be concerned about with AI, like the discrimination that can be embedded in the AI, the incompleteness, the surveillance, all the things that we need to worry about. No doubt it's not a magic bullet, but it will be an essential part in making government work for the people, not for the, I think, billionaires who are eager to see us find a way to make government go away.
I love that you have spoken about bias in AI. We're not going to go too much down that road, but I love that it's in the conversation, because I think when we're speaking about citizenry and democracy and why tense, we have to look at that, because in the context of AI for the people, we've done an incredible amount of work over the last 5 years that we have been in existence around these ideas of AI bias. And I think one of the most exciting projects that we were on was actually, it was us, there was a team, responsible AI team at Google, and actually a professor at Harvard sociology. And the project that we were looking at was, how do we create a computer vision technology that can see more types of people? And using this research from the sociology department, we were able to come up with this idea of skin degradation and skin tones. So the way the computer had been looking traditionally was that people were literally black or white, male or female, and we were able to get these shades of gray. And what ended up happening was a much, 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 much more sophisticated computer vision model that was able to pick up people across the skin color spectrum for the purposes of creating a better camera. And the thing I love about this conversation with you is, can you imagine if we had used that amazing leap forward? It was actually answering a paper by Joy Buolamwini, who was at MIT back in 2018, where she wrote this paper saying facial recognition doesn't recognize Black skin. And the company's response was, well, what can we do to solve that problem? Yeah. But they deployed it to sell a phone. Can you imagine if they had deployed it to increase medical, like when you're going in for an operation and it has to figure out your skin tone, and now all of these babies are being saved? It was just because it was, I guess my question, or where I want to take this conversation was, there was this huge leap taken forward in the science that could have been for the public good, but because it was proprietary information and because the use case was to increase the business case, we got this really narrow application that precluded us from the public good. So I would love for you to speak just a little bit for the audience around how things like IP law and proprietary information means that even the great things that we're doing with AI keeps it in the private realm, and how hopefully we can encourage people as they watch our conversation to think about, I want to be involved in bringing some of that incredible work into the public sphere.
That's such a great example. I didn't know about that example because it illustrates something I think is really fundamental, which is, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And so if it's a private company that's paying for the research or development or paying for your position, they're going to have an ability at some point to say, here's how I want that technology to be used. And if you say, no, 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 we could use this to like do all this public good, they have the right to say, hell no, we're going to use this to do this private good. And, you know, we of course think that once we're rich, we're going to make the world a better place. But the point is, that's not something you have the right to resist if the money is coming from the private sector. Now, there are ways the private sector can fund research or fund development that liberates the people who are developing these technologies or this kind of research to do with it however they want. And that's what we should be aiming for. And interestingly, the government early on, you know, DARPA, which was, of course, responsible for many of the foundational technology investments that define us today, including the internet, DARPA was very good at like releasing money that permitted people to invent things and do with them what they wanted. They were not the way you would fear the government. I mean, you know, compare DARPA to Google, right? So DARPA would fund things and that would be out in the world to do with what you want. Google funds things and it's, you know, a question of whether the thing is going to be available to the world or not. You know, even Google compared to Microsoft, the number of articles that Google publishes for people to learn from Google how Google is doing what it's doing is tiny compared to the number that Microsoft is publishing, because Microsoft has adopted a more public regarding attitude about research. I think we have to accept the reality that we can't depend on the private sector alone, because the private sector is really good at benefiting the private sector. That's what they're paid to do. Instead, we need money coming in a context where it can be used for the public good, where it's not constrained by the particular business model of the company that's trying to supply it. And so that's going to require us spending more money. And obviously, I'm not an idiot. I realize we're in a context where people don't think we have any money in the government and they want to cut the government and all that. I get that. I'm just saying if we don't do that, we're going to miss out on an extraordinary opportunity to make AI make life better for all of us, not just those who are, you know, rich enough or keen enough or connected enough to be of value to these private AI companies.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and it's honestly something that kept me up at night, because we're a nonprofit, we're philanthropy backed. You want to have something great to say in your report, and we did this project, and the
Yeah.
science went forward, but I don't know that the impact went forward. And we had to actually come back and look in our own strategy around how do we make sure we don't get stuck in that, you know, in that kind of, they did a good thing, they ticked off, but really, did they do a good thing? Having said that, I would love to go back to a statement that you made earlier that really tickled me when you said you make lawyers for a living. And as we are thinking about ways in which AI small d can make us, can help us solve these intractable problems. I gave an example around bias, which I'm not for 1 minute saying that that project solved racism, but what it did was it brought more people into the potential conversation. And if we can deploy it differently, the use case could be really good. If we're making less lawyers, because one of the things that AI technologies do is processing and large amounts of information. And one of the things that junior associates do is read lots of information and then tell the partners what's there. And we can give that type of workforce to machines. Do you have any type of vision for the types of skills that we should be training towards, the new workforces that we should be thinking about as we move into? In my own writing, I think about a workforce where we work along technologies to solve uh, big problems. we are not taken over by robots, which is some people, yes, I said it, Elon Musk, I'm sure would love to replace me with a robot, but it's not happened yet. I'm still here. We're having a conversation. You're human. I'm a human. I would love to think about, as you were saying, I want to make less lawyers. What kinds of people should we be making more of, and how can we get to that vision?
Yeah, so much of what lawyers do, the full range of lawyers, is both incredibly costly and incredibly boring. It's costly just because it's like a transaction cost in the process. Think about getting a mortgage, right? Or signing a lease for a rental, or any of the other ways in which people have to interact in lawyers. There's all of this complex documents that they are processing. They're getting paid for all those documents, but they don't like their job, and you don't like the fact you're going through it. We could radically lower those costs. And many of those lawyers would not be lawyers anymore. And I think we have to really think in a global way about the problem of workplace displacement. And I'm not saying I don't think there's any pie in the sky here. I don't think this is automatically going to solve itself. I think we have to be aggressive in making sure that people continue to have have a livelihood or a purpose that makes them feel great. But we don't need to do that by continuing to subsidize an inefficient legal system. Now, if we did that, if the technology displaced all of this boring and costly law, there still is an extremely interesting role for legal talent to play alongside the technology, right? So just like if you look at the way architects have changed since 100 years ago versus today. Like 100 years ago, when an architect spent most of their time doing is drawing buildings, like then drawing things out and like figuring out and measuring and doing all this kind of manual stuff, which now the machines do automatically for them. But that doesn't mean there isn't a role for the architect. Indeed, the architect's role is much more interesting. It's like, let's try 13 different designs on this building. Let's see which one looks the best. And then we can build a 3D model rendering so we can walk through the building and get a better sense of what it's going to feel like. That's a cooler practice for architects. And I think the same thing could be true of the law. I think there's lots of work. My students are some of the brightest people I've ever come across. They have lots of creative ideas about how to make the world a much juster place. They're here. They're not at the business school. They're not trying to make the most money they possibly can. They're here because they want to do justice. They want to use reason to advance society, not power through markets. And so those students, I would love to be able to give the opportunity to think creatively about how we could do law better, how we could make regulation work better, how we can make it so it's actually benefiting the vast majority of citizens, not just the tiny fraction at the very top who benefit from the current system the way it is right now. So we're going to have a role. It just should be a better role if we could imagine building an AI that supports creative, justice-driven legal infrastructure. And that's what I think we need to be talking about and demanding.
Again, I love this. And it puts me in the mind of, I remember years and years ago, when I was very new to the responsible AI field. And I happened to be at a meeting at the Ford Foundation, which is an incredibly weird statement to say for someone who's brand new. And I was in a presentation where they were speaking about how an AI system had been built by a state court system, and it was looking at wrongful convictions and patterns for wrongful convictions within a specific county. So who were the lawyers? What were the pleas? Were the people? What was the socioeconomic profile of the person? What was the race? What was the education? And it was able to develop a model for defendants who were coming in for public defense, who were more vulnerable to being their cases wrongly litigated.
That's great.
And then creating interventions and support. So it was things like childcare for some of the women that came in, making sure that they had childcare. It was things like making sure people could eat, making sure people could dress appropriately for court. And that changed outcomes. And it was nothing to do with the law, but everything to do with the technology and the public interest legal framework and the funding from the Ford Foundation that led to this really amazing holistic view. And the thing I loved most about it, because I'm also a privacy advocate, it was a closed data system.
Hmm.
They destroyed the data.
That's wow.
Sell it. So I'm loving this. I could clearly speak to you all day because I am a geek for justice. I'm a geek for AI. And I am so incredibly happy that we met and we got to have this conversation. So I have one, maybe two more questions before we close. I think I know my last question, but my next question is, one of the things that you said when we were thinking about solving big problems, and you gave me that Taiwan example, we are being told that we're in a hugely divided nation. I love that you used reason and I love that you used voice. This is a very speculative, can you think about maybe local small things you could do? I'm in Brooklyn, you're in Cambridge, where we have things like participatory budgeting in my locality, where we all come together and decide whether we want to make the library nicer. I voted for that, by the way. Can you think about small things that we could do within our local communities to try and get conversations around this kind of using technology to overcome differences? And then I'm going to go to my last question after that.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important way to think about the problem. How do we bring people together to work through problems we share? Because I think the evidence we have from like citizen assembly movements and all of these efforts to build collaborative, representative, local conversations demonstrate that this is the only magic in democracy. Like it's the experience of sitting down with people you disagree with and discovering they're not reptiles. I mean, they're very much like you. They have kids maybe, or they have a partner, or they have a future. They're just trying to make it and make it so that their family can do well too. And so when you can see that people who otherwise you're told are the enemy, they're traitors, are just humans like you, and you can begin to work through a problem together, I think it builds a muscle that democracy depends upon, but that our democracy has let atrophy. It's the muscle of coming to an agreement, common understanding with people who have different views. That's the machine of democracy. We don't have democracy when we all agree. Like, why do we need to do it? Why do we need to vote if we all agree? We only have systems of democracy when we have people with different values and different views who need to find a way to live together and work together. And so we need to practice democracy in a way that teaches us that's possible. So I think that's a critical thing to do. And I think one of the things that's happening at the Berkman Klein Center is that we have bought a deliberative platform to enable virtual deliberations. And we're going to open source it and encourage the widest range of people to adopt it and use it to facilitate these virtual deliberations, which I think are not as good necessarily as doing it in person, but it's a kind of gateway drug. Like if you do it virtually and it turns out to be the kind of experience you like and you love the idea of connecting and talking to people who you otherwise would not meet, it's more likely you'll be able to do that in a physical context, in a citizen assembly or something like that. Like participatory budgeting is a great example of that.
So my final question, but before I get to that, if you will permit me, Professor Lessing, I am a huge fan of yours. And not just because of this conversation, I have been in this conversation searching for, why do I know this name? Why do I know this name? So I'm a former fellow of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. So I will consider myself as an alum. Looking forward to using this platform, but I'm also now a PhD student at Cambridge, the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And during my first supervised, and I'm studying the internet, but this isn't about me. During my first supervisor advisory, I'm sure that's not a name. My supervisor handed me a book, and the book was Code 2.0. And my supervisor said, do you know Larry Lessing? And I said, no, I don't. I'm famous for knowing nobody apart from Beyonce. So please don't feel bad. I know my kids. I know my kids need to go to college. I know tuition is a lot, but I don't know anybody else, pretty much. And I read and I sat with the book and we discussed the book, and it is such an incredible honor and pleasure. And next time I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I am going to hunt you down because I would love for you to sign my copy. And if you are ever, I hope that I will get the opportunity to invite you to Cambridge in the United Kingdom, to my department, because your book was part of our digital humanities reading session that we had this term too.
Wow.
So
Wow. That's
you were
very sweet. I spent 3 beautiful years in Cambridge when I was studying philosophy many, many years ago. So I would come back anytime invited.
Well, I get to we all get as students to say who we want. So
Mm.
if you get an invitation, I have definitely put you forward.
Thank you.
My
Thank you.
final question. This conversation has invigorated me. This conversation has made me really excited. I know that you are a law professor and you are not a clairvoyant, but I'm going to ask, could you just play a clairvoyant for me in this question? We're going into at least the next 2 years, if not four, where the public interest is not probably going to be on the top of the agenda. This is not the indications that we've been given. However, we do we're informed citizens. We are powerful citizens. What do you, as a two-part question, what do you envisage are going to be the types of policies in terms of AI development and tech that you'll see? And what can we do to hold true to the fact that these technologies are public goods, should be used for the public good, and we can use the power of democracy, the power of community organizing and really speaking to our representatives to say that this too shall pass. And when it does pass, we want to get back onto this road. And a horrible plug for my own organization, but get to the road where AI is truly for the people.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. We're gonna face some significant challenges. I think, it's a little unsure, certain right now, what position the administration is going to take on AI regulation, because while most of what they've said is AI deregulation, the president-elect promising to repeal Biden's executive orders and go back to square one, basically let the market do what the market wants to do. On the other hand, this kind of crazy man, Elon Musk, has long identified the risks of AI as a reason to be regulating. I was surprised when he joined many of us supporting California's SB 1047, which was, I thought, an important first step in building an environment for safe AI. So we don't know what they're going to do. But here's what I know we have to do. I think this election taught us at least this. We don't know how to talk to each other. We all lived in our own silos. We all had views about what was going to happen. We all thought the other side was crazy and evil. We can't afford that attitude anymore. It's too lazy. It's just too self-indulgent. If all you're doing is speaking to people who agree with you, you are failing as a citizen. We have got to find a way to begin to talk to each other and with each other, not because we're trying to teach each other or we're trying to lecture each other or trying to force them to agree with us, just trying to understand each other. I did something in this election cycle I haven't done since I graduated from high school. I went back to a high school reunion. I grew up in the Kentucky part of Pennsylvania, which is this extremely right-wing part of Pennsylvania. I knew many of my friends would be Trump supporters. I wanted to go back and talk to them, not to persuade them, but just to understand. And one friend, a guy named Ben, who was like a major sports figure. I had nothing to do with sports, but he was like a hero in my high school. He and I spent 3 hours on an interview, just talking through the issues. And then we had like maybe 25 different emails back and forth leading up to the election. And the whole purpose was just trying to understand each other. And I think all of us have that obligation. And especially given the threats we now face, we have to find a way to hack around the AI that is going to try to turn us into polarized people who hate each other. That's what it did in 2020. It's what it did in 2024. We can't submit ourselves to that influence without resisting it. And so resisting it means learning how to hear what the other side has to say. You don't have to agree, but you have to learn how to hear. And I think if we did that, we could begin to build the understanding that the next stage of this democracy will require.
Professor Lessing, thank you for spending this time with us. I hope that the audience enjoyed this conversation as much as I do. It's not every day that I get to meet somebody who I certainly think of as a hero and whose thinking is shaping mine as I go forward in the next steps in my career. I'm incredibly grateful. And I hope that you and your family and everybody and all your families are safe and happy. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for talking to me and for the work you're doing. Your organization is extremely important, and we need many more people joining in that kind of work. So thank you for that too.